Ilara had been serving feasts at Blackmore Castle for 7 years. She knew the rhythm of these events like she knew her own heartbeat. The careful choreography of servants weaving between tables, the precise timing of each course, the invisible dance that kept the nobility fed and entertained, while the people who made it happen remained unseen. She was good at being unseen. It was the first skill any servant learned: how to fade into the background, how to anticipate needs without being noticed, how to exist in the spaces between important people without ever becoming important yourself. Tonight's feast was the largest of the year, the winter solstice celebration, marking the longest night and the promise of returning light. Every noble house had sent representatives. Foreign dignitaries filled the honoured seats, and at the head of the great hall, presiding over it all, sat the Lycan king. Ilara had never looked directly at him, not once in 7 years. She knew his shape, massive, dark-haired, commanding, from the glimpses she caught in her peripheral vision. She knew his voice, deep and resonant, carrying easily over the noise of crowds. She knew his presence, a weight in the air, a gravitational pull that made everyone in the room hyper-aware of exactly where he was. But she had never met his eyes. Servants didn't look at kings. The feast was in full swing when it happened. Ilara was circulating with a basket of fresh bread, warm from the ovens, fragrant with herbs, the kind of bread that nobles took for granted and servants dreamed of tasting. She moved along the edges of the room, offering her wares to those seated at the lower tables, working her way up the hierarchy as protocol demanded. She was approaching the high table when she noticed. The king's bread basket was empty. It shouldn't have been. There were supposed to be servants dedicated specifically to the high table, to ensuring the king and his honoured guests never wanted for anything. But the chaos of the evening had clearly disrupted the usual order. The bread basket sat empty before the most powerful man in the realm, and no one seemed to have noticed. No one except Ilara. She hesitated. Approaching the high table unbidden was a breach of protocol. She wasn't assigned to serve royalty. She was a lower servant, meant for the lower tables, invisible and interchangeable. But the king had no bread, and the basket in her hands was full. Before she could overthink it, Ilara moved. She approached the high table with her head bowed, her steps careful and measured. She could feel eyes on her, the nobles at the surrounding tables, the guards stationed along the walls, everyone noticing the breach in protocol and waiting to see what would happen. She stopped beside the king's chair and held out her basket. "Your Majesty." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "May I offer you bread?" Silence. The conversations around them quieted. The nobles at the high table turned to stare. Ilara kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her heart hammering so loud she was certain everyone could hear it. And then, "Look at me." The command was soft, not harsh, not angry, just curious. Ilara's breath caught. She shouldn't. Protocol dictated that servants never meet the eyes of royalty. It was one of the first rules she'd learned, drilled into her during her earliest days at the castle. But she had already broken protocol by approaching him. What was one more transgression? Slowly she raised her eyes. King Caelan Ashford was looking at her like she was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. He was beautiful. That was her first, traitorous thought. Not handsome in the way of nobles, with their soft features and pampered skin. Beautiful like a storm was beautiful, like a mountain, like something ancient and powerful that could crush you without noticing, but chose not to. His eyes were the gold of late afternoon sunlight, and they were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. You noticed my bread was empty, he said. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Yes, Your Majesty. No one else did. 100 servants in this hall, and you were the only one who noticed. His head tilted slightly, studying her. What's your name? Ilara, Your Majesty. Ilara Thorne. Ilara. He said it like he was tasting the word, testing its weight on his tongue. How long have you served in my castle, Ilara Thorne? 7 years, Your Majesty. 7 years. Something flickered in those golden eyes. And in all that time, have we ever spoken? Her cheeks flushed hot. No, Your Majesty. I'm a lower servant. I don't serve at the high table. Yet here you are, at my table, offering me bread. She didn't know what to say. Apologies crowded on her tongue. She could explain that she'd noticed the oversight, that she hadn't meant to overstep, that she would accept whatever punishment her breach of protocol demanded. But before she could speak, the king did something that stopped her heart entirely. He took her hand, not the bread. Her hand, the one not holding the basket. He wrapped his large fingers around hers and held on, his grip warm and firm and impossibly gentle. Sit with me, he said. The hall went silent, utterly, completely silent. Your Majesty? Ilara's voice was barely a whisper. Sit with me. He gestured to the empty seat beside him, the Queen's seat, vacant for 3 centuries. I would like to share this bread with the woman who noticed I had none. I can't. That's not. She was stammering, her mind reeling. I'm a servant. I can't sit at the high table. The protocol. I am the protocol. His voice was gentle, but absolute. And I'm asking you to sit with me, Ilara Thorne. Will you? She should refuse. Every rule she'd ever learned, every instinct drilled into her over 7 years of service, screamed at her to apologize and retreat, to fade back into the invisibility that kept her safe. But his hand was still wrapped around hers, and his eyes, those golden eyes, were looking at her like she mattered, like she was someone worth seeing. Okay, she breathed. I'll sit with you. The king smiled. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines, revealing a warmth that Ilara hadn't known existed. He released her hand, only long enough to pull out the chair beside him, guiding her into the seat like she was a queen rather than a servant holding a bread basket. She sat, in the queen's chair, at the high table, with the king of the Lycans looking at her like she'd just given him the world instead of an offer of bread. Now, Kaelin said, taking a piece of bread from her basket and tearing it in 2, offering her half. Tell me about yourself, Ilara Thorne. I find myself very eager to learn everything about the woman who finally looked at me. The whispers had started, scandalized murmurs rippling through the hall like waves. But Ilara barely heard them. All she could focus on was the king beside her, the bread warm in her hands, and the terrifying, exhilarating sense that her entire life had just changed. She had offered him bread, and somehow, impossibly, she had been offered something far greater in return. The rest of the feast passed in a blur. Ilara answered Kaelin's questions as best she could, her voice trembling at first, then steadying as she grew accustomed to his gentle attention. She told him about her childhood in a small village at the edge of the kingdom, about losing her parents to sickness when she was 12, about finding work at the castle because it was the only place that would take an orphan with no skills and no prospects. He listened to every word like it mattered, like she mattered. And you've been here 7 years, he said, serving at feasts, cleaning halls, being invisible. It's a good life. She meant it. Better than many people have. I'm fed, I'm housed, I'm safe. I've never complained. That's not the same as being happy. The observation cut deeper than she expected. She looked down at the half-eaten bread in her hands, unable to meet his eyes. Servants don't get to be happy, Your Majesty. We get to survive. Silence stretched between them. When she finally glanced up, his golden eyes were filled with something that looked like pain. That, he said quietly, is something I intend to change. The feast ended. The nobles departed, still whispering behind their hands, casting curious glances at the servant girl who had sat in the queen's chair. Ilara expected to be sent back to the kitchens, to her narrow cot in the servants' quarters, to the life she had always known. Instead, Kaelan walked her to the guest wing. "These will be your chambers," he said, stopping before a door carved with intricate patterns. "At least for tonight. Tomorrow, we'll discuss more permanent arrangements." "Your Majesty, I can't. This is for nobles, for guests." "You are my guest." He turned to face her, and in the torchlight of the hallway, his features seemed softer than they had in the great hall, more vulnerable. "Ilara, I need to tell you something. Something that will sound impossible." Her heart stuttered. "What is it?" He was quiet for a moment, as if gathering courage. The king of the Lycans, gathering courage to speak to a servant girl. "When you looked at me tonight," he said slowly, "something happened. Something I've been waiting 300 years to feel." His golden eyes held hers. "The mate bond. It recognized you." Ilara's breath stopped. I'm not. "You are." His voice was certain, absolute. "My mate, my true mate. The other half of my soul that I had begun to believe didn't exist." He reached out, his fingers hovering near her face, but not quite touching. I felt it the moment our eyes met. The pull, the recognition, the certainty that I had finally found you. But I'm a servant. The words came out broken. "I'm no one. I brought you bread." "You noticed me." His voice cracked. "In a room full of people trying to get my attention, trying to impress me, trying to use me. You noticed that I had no bread. You saw a need, and you met it, without thought of reward or recognition. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious?" Tears burned in Ilara's eyes. "I was just doing my job." "You were being kind." His hand finally made contact, cupping her cheek with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "Kindness is the rarest gift in the world, Ilara, and you gave it freely to a king you'd never even looked at before tonight." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the impossibility of everything that was happening. "I don't know how to be a queen," she whispered. "I don't know how to be anything but invisible." "Then I'll teach you." He brushed away her tears with his thumb. "I'll teach you how to be seen, how to be valued, how to take up the space you deserve in this world." His forehead pressed against hers. "And if you decide you don't want any of this, the bond, the crown, me, I'll let you go. I won't force you into anything. I just ask for a chance to prove that you deserve so much more than survival." Ilara closed her eyes, feeling his warmth surrounding her, feeling the pull he'd spoken of, that strange, magnetic connection that hummed between them like a living thing. She should be terrified. She should run back to the kitchens, to the safety of invisibility, to the life she understood. But when she opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, she didn't see a king. She saw a man who had been waiting 300 years for someone to truly see him, who had been surrounded by people seeking his power and position, but never his heart. She saw loneliness that mirrored her own. "Okay," she breathed. "Show me." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Kaelin gave her time to adjust, space to process, room to breathe. He didn't push for more than she could give. He simply showed up. Every morning at breakfast, every evening for dinner, every afternoon for walks in the castle gardens, where he asked her questions and listened to her answers like they were the most important words ever spoken. She learned about him, too, about his centuries of rule, his burdens, his hopes for the kingdom, about the loneliness that had grown so heavy he'd stopped believing it would ever lift, about the way his heart had nearly stopped when a servant girl with warm brown eyes had looked up at him and offered bread. "I thought I was imagining it," he admitted one evening as they walked through the winter garden. "The bond. I thought I wanted it so badly that I was inventing the feeling. And now? Now I know it's real." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Every moment I spend with you makes it stronger, clearer, more undeniable." His hand found hers, intertwining their fingers. "I'm falling in love with you, Alara, not because of the bond, but because of who you are. Your kindness, your quiet strength, the way you see needs that no one else notices and meet them without hesitation." Her heart swelled. "I think I'm falling for you, too." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "You think?" "I know." She squeezed his hand. "I've spent my whole life being invisible, being overlooked, being nothing. And then you looked at me, really looked at me, and suddenly I felt like I existed for the first time." Tears pricked at her eyes. "That's not something I can ignore. That's not something I want to ignore." Kaelin cupped her face in his hands. "You've always existed, Alara. You've always mattered. The world was just too blind to see it. You saw it. I saw you." He pressed his forehead to hers. "And I will spend every day of our existence making sure you never feel invisible again." She kissed him. It was soft, tentative, her first real kiss, though she'd never admit it. But Kaelin responded like she'd given him the world, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her close, his lips gentle against hers. When they parted, both breathless, he was smiling. "Was that okay?" she whispered. "That," he said, "was everything." She laughed, and the sound surprised her, bright and free, and full of a joy she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. Maybe servants didn't get to be happy, but maybe, just maybe, she wasn't going to be a servant anymore. Weeks passed, and Ilara bloomed. It happened so gradually she almost didn't notice, but Kaelin noticed. He noticed everything about her. He noticed when she started walking with her shoulders back instead of hunched, when she began speaking in full sentences instead of murmured fragments, when she laughed without covering her mouth, when she offered opinions without apologizing, when she looked people in the eye instead of at the floor. She was becoming visible, and she was magnificent. "You solved the grain distribution problem," Kaelin said one afternoon, staring at the documents spread across his desk with something like awe. Ilara shrugged, a faint blush colouring her cheeks. "It wasn't complicated. The village councils were tracking inventory differently than the castle, so the numbers never matched. I just suggested they use the same system. A problem my advisors have been arguing about for 6 months." He set down the papers and looked at her. You fixed it in an afternoon. I used to help with the kitchen inventories. It's the same principle, just bigger. It's brilliant. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. You're brilliant, Ilara. Every day you show me something new, some insight, some solution, some way of seeing the world that no one else has ever shown me. She ducked her head, still uncomfortable with praise despite his constant efforts. I'm just practical. You're extraordinary. He tipped her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. When will you start believing that? I'm trying. And she was. Every day she tried a little harder to see herself the way he saw her. It's just difficult to unlearn 19 years of being told I'm nothing. Then I'll spend the next 300 years teaching you otherwise. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. However long it takes. The bond between them had grown stronger with each passing day. Ilara could feel him now, a warm presence at the edge of her consciousness, a sense of his emotions that grew clearer whenever they touched. She knew when he was worried before he spoke. She felt his joy when he looked at her. She sensed his love like sunlight on her skin. I want the bond, she told him one evening, as they sat together in the library she'd come to love. The full bond. I want to be yours completely. Kaelin went very still. Are you certain? There's no rushing this. I told you I would wait. I've spent my whole life waiting. She turned to face him, taking his hands. Waiting for things to get better. Waiting for someone to see me. Waiting for a life that felt like more than just survival. Her voice strengthened. I don't want to wait anymore. I want to start living. I want to start living with you. He kissed her, deep and fierce and full of 300 years of longing. Tonight, he breathed against her lips. If you're ready, we complete the bond tonight. I'm ready. The bonding was everything Ilara had dreamed and more. When Kaelin marked her, his teeth sinking into the junction of her neck and shoulder, she felt the bond explode to life, a flood of warmth and light that connected them soul to soul. She felt his love pouring into her, vast and ancient and absolutely certain. She felt his joy, his relief, his overwhelming gratitude that she had chosen him. And she felt him feeling her wonder, her happiness, her disbelief that this was really her life now. They were one, complete, whole. Afterward, tangled together in silk sheets, Kaelin traced the mate mark on her neck with reverent fingers. You're mine now, he murmured, in every way that matters. I was yours the moment you took my hand at the feast. She turned to face him, studying his features in the candlelight. I just didn't know it yet. I knew. His smile was soft. The moment you looked at me, I knew. I just had to wait for you to see it too. I see it now. She kissed him, gentle and sweet. I see everything now. He pulled her close, tucking her against his chest, and Ilara listened to his heartbeat, steady and strong and perfectly synchronized with her own. For 19 years, she had been invisible. Now she was seen, loved, claimed by a king who had waited 3 centuries just for her. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like finally coming home. But happiness, Ilara was about to learn, always came with a price. The whispers had never stopped. Not since that first night at the feast, when a servant had sat in the queen's chair. The nobles talked behind their hands, speculating about the girl who had captured the king's attention. Most assumed it would pass. A dalliance, they called it. A temporary fascination. When the bonding was announced, the whispers turned to something darker. "She's bewitched him," Lady Vance declared at a court gathering, not bothering to lower her voice. "Some kind of magic. No servant could truly be the king's mate." "Perhaps she's after his fortune," Lord Blackwood suggested. "A clever scheme by a clever peasant." "The bloodlines," another noble fretted. "What will this mean for the royal bloodlines? A servant's child on the throne?" Ilara heard them all. Every whisper, every sneer, every cruel speculation about her motives and her worth. She tried not to let it affect her. She had Caelan, after all. She had his love, his protection, his absolute certainty that she belonged at his side. But the words burrowed under her skin anyway. Late at night, when Caelan slept beside her, she lay awake and wondered if they were right, if she really was an imposter, if the bond was somehow a mistake, a cosmic error that had given a servant girl ideas above her station. Caelan felt her doubt through the bond. "They're wrong," he said one morning, finding her staring out the window at the snow-covered grounds. "Every word they say is wrong. You know that." "Do I?" She didn't turn around. "Maybe they see something you don't. Maybe they see the truth, that I'm just a servant girl who got lucky, who doesn't belong here." "Ilara." He turned her to face him, his golden eyes fierce. "You belong here more than any of them. You've done more good in 2 months than most nobles manage in a lifetime. You've solved problems that have plagued this kingdom for years. You've shown more kindness, more intelligence, more grace than anyone I've ever known. They don't see that. Then they're blind." His hands cupped her face. "But I see it. I've always seen it. And I will keep seeing it every day for the rest of our existence." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I want to believe you." "Then believe me." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Believe that I love you. Believe that you deserve to be here. And believe that one day they will see what I see. A queen worthy of every crown in every kingdom." She closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll try. That's all I ask." He pulled her into his arms. "And in the meantime, I have an idea." "What kind of idea?" "The kind that involves proving to the entire kingdom exactly how remarkable you are." His smile held a hint of mischief. "Trust me?" She looked up at him. This king who had seen a queen in a servant, who had loved her before she knew how to love herself. "Always," she said. And she meant it. Caelan's idea was deceptively simple, a winter relief effort. The harsh season had hit the outer villages hard, food stores depleted, homes damaged by storms, families struggling to survive. The crown always provided aid, of course, but the distribution was handled by noble overseers who took their cut before passing along whatever remained. "I want you to lead it," Caelan said. "Not as my mate, not as future queen, as yourself. Ilara Thorne, the woman who notices what others overlook, the woman who sees needs and meets them. The nobles will never accept. The nobles aren't invited." His smile sharpened. "This is crown business, conducted by crown authority. They can watch from their comfortable estates while you show them how real leadership works." So Ilara went. She travelled to the outer villages with a caravan of supplies, a small guard, and absolutely no patience for the inefficiencies she discovered. The previous system had been designed by people who had never known hunger, never felt cold seeping through inadequate walls, never understood what it meant to watch children go without. Ilara understood. She understood everything. Within a week, she had restructured the entire distribution network. She established direct supply lines that bypassed the noble middlemen. She organized village councils to manage their own resources, training local leaders who knew their community's needs better than any outsider could. She set up emergency stores that could be accessed immediately when crisis struck, rather than waiting for bureaucratic approval. And everywhere she went, she talked to people. Not at them, not about them, to them. She sat in their homes and shared their bread. She held their children and heard their stories. She remembered their names, their struggles, their small joys. She saw them. Word spread quickly. The king's mate, the servant girl who had sat in the queen's chair, was travelling the kingdom and actually helping. Not performing charity for appearance's sake, but rolling up her sleeves and doing the work, listening, caring, making things better. By the time she returned to Blackmoor, something had shifted. The nobles still whispered, "Of course." But now their whispers were tinged with something new: uncertainty, grudging respect, the dawning realization that perhaps they had underestimated the servant girl after all. "They're saying you distributed more aid in 3 weeks than the previous system managed in 3 months," Kaelan told her, pulling her into his arms the moment she walked through the castle doors. "They're saying you remembered the name of every village elder. They're saying children in the outer territories are calling you the Bread Queen." Ilara laughed, exhausted but glowing. "The Bread Queen? Because you brought them bread, because you sat with them and shared meals, because—" His voice roughened with emotion. "Because you did exactly what you did that first night at the feast. You noticed a need, and you met it. I just did what needed to be done. You did what no one else thought to do." He cupped her face, studying her with wonder. "You changed everything, Ilara. In 3 weeks, you've done more for this kingdom's reputation than a century of noble politics." "I had help. The guards, the village councils, they had you." He kissed her, deep and reverent. "And so do I. So does this entire kingdom." The coronation was announced for the spring equinox. No one protested. The nobles who had whispered about bewitchment and schemes fell silent in the face of overwhelming evidence. The common folk, who had always been skeptical of those in power, rallied behind the servant girl, who had become one of their own champions. Ilara spent the weeks before the ceremony in a daze of preparation. There were fittings for gowns and lessons in protocol, and endless meetings about the logistics of crowning a queen. Through it all, Kaelan stayed at her side, steady and supportive and impossibly proud. "Nervous?" he asked the night before the coronation. "Terrified," she admitted. "What if I trip? What if I forget the words? What if—" "What if you walk into that hall and every person there sees exactly what I've always seen?" He pulled her close. "A woman of extraordinary kindness, a leader who puts others before herself, a queen who earned her crown through service rather than birth." "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "You just have to be yourself, Ilara. That's all you've ever had to do. Be yourself, and let the world finally see what I saw that first night. A woman worth noticing. A woman worth loving. A woman worth following." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I love you. I love you too." He wiped her tears with gentle thumbs. "Now get some sleep, my queen. Tomorrow, we show them all." The great hall was transformed. Banners of gold and silver hung from the rafters. Flowers lined the aisle. Winter blooms shipped from the southern territories, their fragrance filling the air. Every seat was filled. Nobles in their finest attire. Foreign dignitaries come to witness history, and, at Ilara's insistence, common folk from the villages she had visited, given places of honor near the front. Ilara stood at the entrance, her gown a deep burgundy that reminded her of the wine she used to serve, her auburn hair woven with golden threads, the mate mark on her neck displayed proudly for all to see. "Ready?" Kalen asked, offering his arm. She looked at him, this king who had seen a queen in a serving girl, who had waited 300 years and found his mate offering bread at a feast. "Ready?" she said. They walked into the hall together. The ceremony was beautiful, but Ilara barely registered the words. She was too busy looking at the faces in the crowd, the nobles who had doubted her, now watching with something like respect. The village elders she had visited, tears streaming down their weathered faces. The servants lining the walls, her former colleagues, eyes shining with pride that one of their own had risen so high. When the high priestess placed the crown upon her head, the hall erupted. Not polite applause, not restrained acknowledgement. A roar of genuine celebration that shook the rafters and brought tears to Ilara's eyes. "Rise, Queen Ilara of Blackmoor." She rose, and as she turned to face her kingdom now, truly hers, she saw Lady Vance in the crowd, the woman who had called her bewitched, who had questioned her motives and her worth. Lady Vance was applauding with the rest of them. Ilara met her eyes and smiled, not with triumph, not with vindication, just with the quiet confidence of a woman who had finally learned to see her own worth. The lady bowed her head in acknowledgement, and Ilara turned to Kalen, took his hand, and stepped into her future. 1 year later, Ilara stood in the great hall and watched the winter solstice feast unfold before her. The same hall where everything had changed, the same celebration, with its music and laughter and endless parade of courses. The same tables filled with nobles and dignitaries, and the carefully choreographed dance of servants weaving between them. But everything was different now. She was different. The servants moved through the hall with their heads held higher than they had a year ago. The new policies she'd implemented, fair wages, reasonable hours, protection from abuse, had transformed their lives. They smiled now, these invisible people she had once been. They joked with each other, met the eyes of those they served, existed as people rather than shadows. And when they passed the high table, they looked at their queen with something like pride. "You're thinking again," Kalen murmured, his hand finding hers beneath the table. "Just remembering." She turned to smile at him. 1 year ago, I walked into this hall with a basket of bread. I was invisible, forgettable, nothing. You were never nothing. I felt like nothing." She squeezed his hand. "And then you looked at me. You saw me. You changed everything." "You changed everything," he corrected. "I just had the good sense to notice." She laughed, and the sound carried through the hall, free and bright, and full of a joy that still surprised her sometimes. A servant approached the high table, young, nervous, clutching a basket of bread. Ilara recognized her immediately. Mira, barely 16, hired just 3 months ago from one of the outer villages. The girl's hands were trembling as she held out the basket. "Your Majesties, may I offer you bread?" Ilara's heart clenched at the echo of her own words, spoken in this very hall 1 year ago. "Thank you, Mira," she said gently. "Would you like to sit with us for a moment?" The girl's eyes went wide. I couldn't possibly. You can." Ilara gestured to the empty seat on her other side. A seat she always kept open at feasts now, in case someone needed it. The Queen's invitation. Mira looked at Kaelin, who smiled encouragingly. Then, slowly, she set down her basket and slid into the seat. "How are you finding the work?" Ilara asked, passing the girl a piece of bread. "Is everything as you expected?" "Better," Mira admitted, still looking stunned to be sitting at the high table. "Much better. The other servants said that things used to be different. Harder. But you changed it." "We changed it together?" Ilara smiled. "All of us who have ever been invisible, all of us who know what it's like to be overlooked." She held the girl's gaze. "You're not invisible, Mira. Not here. Not to me." Tears glistened in the young servant's eyes. After a few minutes of conversation, Mira returned to her duties, standing taller than she had before, a small smile playing at her lips. Ilara watched her go, her heart full. "You do that every feast?" Kaelin observed. "Invite a servant to sit with you." "Someone invited me once." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "It changed my life. Maybe I can change someone else's." "You already have." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "You've changed thousands of lives. The relief efforts, the servant reforms, the village councils. You've transformed this kingdom, Ilara. And it all started because you noticed I had no bread. It started because you noticed me noticing." A mutual noticing, then. His arm wrapped around her. The foundation of a great love story. She laughed again, that free, bright sound that had become so natural over the past year. "You're ridiculous." "I'm in love." He pulled back to look at her face. "Which reminds me, I have a gift for you." "A gift?" "Kaelin, the coronation anniversary isn't for another 3 months." "This couldn't wait." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "Open it." Inside was a pendant, a delicate golden wheat sheaf, studded with tiny amber gems that caught the light like drops of honey. "Wheat," Ilara breathed. "Like bread. Like the bread you offered me 1 year ago tonight." His voice was thick with emotion. "The bread that changed everything. The bread that brought me the other half of my soul." Tears slipped down her cheeks as he fastened the chain around her neck. The pendant settled against her collarbone, warm and perfect. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." He cupped her face in his hands. "My mate, my queen, my partner in everything. Your bread bearer." He laughed, that full, warm sound she had learned to treasure. "My bread bearer, forever and always." She kissed him, right there at the high table, in front of the entire court. Let them whisper. Let them talk. She had earned this happiness. She had earned this love. Later that night, after the feast had ended and the guests had departed, Ilara stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, looking out at the snow-covered kingdom below. Kaelin found her there, as he always did. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, as he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What is it?" She turned in his embrace, taking his hands and placing them on her stomach, still flat, but not for long. "We're going to have a child." Kaelin went absolutely still. His golden eyes searched her face, hope and wonder and overwhelming joy flickering across his features. "A child," he breathed. "Our child." "Our child." She smiled through her tears. "A prince or princess who will grow up knowing they are seen, valued, loved." He dropped to his knees before her, pressing his forehead to her stomach, his shoulders shaking with emotion. I have waited 300 years, he said, his voice cracked and raw. 300 years for a mate, for a family, for this. He looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. You have given me everything, Ilara. Everything I never dared to hope for. She ran her fingers through his hair. You gave me everything first. You saw me when I was invisible. You loved me when I didn't know how to love myself. You took my hand when I offered you bread and said, "Sit with me." He rose to his feet, pulling her into his arms. The best decision I ever made. The best decision we ever made. She pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Together. They stood together in the moonlight, king and queen, mates and partners, two people who had found each other across centuries of loneliness and a single offered basket of bread. 1 year ago, Ilara had been a servant, invisible, forgettable, nothing. Now she was a queen, a wife, a mother-to-be, a woman who had learned that kindness was never wasted, that small gestures could change worlds, that being seen was the greatest gift one person could give another. She had offered him bread, and he had given her everything. If you enjoyed Ilara and Kaelin's story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Leave a comment below telling me your favorite part, and I'll see you in the next one.